Order. Hello, my name is Michael Hope and I am the Chair of the British Youth Council's Youth Select Committee conducting an inquiry into votes at 16. I'd like to welcome you to today's panel. Over recent years, the debate regarding votes at 16 has been reignited due to its reduction in parts for the Scottish referendum on independence. The purpose of this Select Committee is to review both sides of the argument for and against the reduction of the voting age to 16. In addition to this, we will review factors such as youth political engagement, political parties' views on young people, and citizenship education. May I ask that all present ensure that mobile phones are turned on silent, and if they are, please engage with the debate on Twitter using the hashtag YouthSelect. Once again, I'd like to welcome you to the committee, and if you could introduce yourselves, that would be appreciated, starting with Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Korris. I'm a senior researcher at the Hansard Society, and it's Hansard Society, not Hansard, just so you know.
Hi, I'm Beccy Allen. I'm a project manager for education projects at the Hansard Society.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to pass on to Brandon, who has our first question.
Thank you for coming. What effect do you think that lowering the voting age would have on young people in general? Start with Matt.
What effect would it have on young people in general? In terms of their political engagement, I'm not sure the act of lowering the voting age is the thing that's going to necessarily make a massive difference. I think the things that would need to go alongside lowering the voting age, i.e. a much greater emphasis on citizenship education, on understanding politics, that would be the thing that would make a difference potentially to the way that young people perceive politics, their attitudes towards it. I'm not sure simply changing the voting age would make anywhere near a big enough difference on its own without that absolutely essential support to go with it.
I think I'd echo what Matt said. A lot of the issues that we hear from young people in our projects is that they are less, their understanding of politics can be quite limited, and they find that finding impartial information about politics quite difficult. Citizenship education is not as good for a lot of young people as they think it should be. So it's more for us about political education, I would say, as the biggest impact for young people and their attitudes to politics.
Can you think of any negative effects that lowering the voting age would have on young people?
Well, if you didn't have the attached, improvements in citizenship education that we'd certainly be emphasising, I think you'd just end up with another generation of young people who felt that they didn't have the understanding and the ability to, really make a difference. That we think it's important that young people and all citizens really do have that kind of understanding and ability to engage with the political system when they want to and when they feel the need to. I mean, we see at the moment that the youngest age groups from many of the surveys we do, the 18 to 24-year-olds, are the least knowledgeable, they feel the least interested, they're the least likely to participate in any of the forms of political participation that we track. And I think you just lowering it to 16, you'd have two more years worth of young people with similarly low engagement profiles. So that would be the risk. You would end up with more young people who aren't terribly engaged, and you would miss the opportunity to really get them engaged, make them feel like they can be empowered to participate when they want to.
Yeah, I'd agree with what Matt said, that actually it's more about making sure they understand about what they're voting for, what the political parties stand for, and what the meaning of voting is about, and that only really comes through education.
Do you think there are any convincing arguments for lowering the voting age, aside from arguments about political engagement?
I think the arguments around votes at 16 sort of come down to what are the problems we're trying to solve? Is it low turnout in elections? Is it limited understanding and engagement with politics? Or is it a sort of general, this is a fairness argument you're trying to tackle? And I think in terms of participation levels at elections, lowering the voting age, I don't think will improve the percentage turnout rate at elections, young people generally have the lowest levels of turnout at elections. Enfranchising a couple of years younger people, I don't think would make a massive difference to that. So I don't think it solves the turnout problems that we have. I don't think on its own it solves the limited understanding and engagement with politics. I think citizenship education, as I've said a number of times, is the solution to that problem. So I'm not sure it's not having that you need arguments against votes at 16. I just don't think votes at 16 is the solution to the problems that you might want to address.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Philip has the next question.
You say in your written evidence that the public are overwhelmingly content with the voting age being 18. Is that a reason not to change it? If we start with Beccy.
Can I pass this on to Matt? He's really sort of dealing with the votes at 16 questions because he's the audit specialist. Sorry.
Is it a reason absolutely not to do it? No, it isn't. There are always going to be times when society has to make decisions and make changes that aren't necessarily the ones that the majority of society would naturally support without, being fully engaged in the debates around them. I mean, you can see the societal changes that we've had in the past couple of years, in the past decade, around civil partnerships and now marriage for gay and lesbian people. Those are societal changes that have happened, even though it would be hard to say that the overwhelming majority of the public from surveys were in favour of them. I think that those have been good changes, positive changes, where politicians have needed to lead, even though there wasn't necessarily an overwhelming majority. But I think you do have to consider what the majority of the public think. You do have to persuade, as best as possible, the majority of the public that this is a good thing. You've got to set out clear reasons and convincing reasons why you are choosing to do something that the evidence at least suggests that the majority of the public aren't in favour of.
And in last week's evidence, it was suggested that voting is a right. Do you agree? And if so, is voting as a right more significant than public opinion?
I think voting is a right, but I'm not sure that necessarily means that you lower it to 16. It depends on whether you think voting at 16 is a right or not, and I'm not sure the evidence and weight of argument is necessarily in support of that. As you heard from Andrew Russell earlier on this morning, there's all kinds of ages of maturity for different aspects of life in this country, and the general trend seems to be raising rather than lowering the age at which young people can do things to 18 rather than down to 16. So I'm not sure, even if one, and we would perceive voting as a right, whether that necessarily follows that 16-year-olds are ready to have that right in the same way as other things that they have rights to.
Thank you. Joe?
I think this question will be another one from Matt. Do you think that 16-year-olds are capable of understanding politics and political decisions?
I think 16-year-olds are capable of understanding politics and political decisions. I don't think the way that politics is taught at the moment actually enfranchises and gives enough understanding to young people to allow the majority of them to do so. The citizenship curriculum and the teaching of politics, which I will now hand this bit over to Beccy, is nowhere near good enough to really give enough 16-year-olds to have that understanding. And the fact that when I meet lots of young people who have had citizenship education, they don't realise they've had it. They are young people who are engaged in politics, and they don't seem to have noticed that this has happened for them. So the weaknesses in citizenship education, I'd say, are the reasons why at the moment I'm not sure enough 16-year-olds are in that position.
I think one of the reasons for this is that often the citizenship education system can be quite misunderstood by teachers, by parents and by students, and often students don't realise that what they're being taught is politics because it's so dispersed either throughout the curriculum or it's not called politics. Citizenship is a bit of a difficult to define subject, sometimes mixed up with citizenship tests for sort of citizenship to be a British citizen, and I think there's that difficulty that we need to really try and address before we go down the road of votes at 16. I think that's the thing. The education is what needs to come first.
Thank you.
Jack has the next question.
So when I move on to political engagement, why do you feel young people are less likely to vote than older people are, the older age groups?
I think there's a whole number of reasons why that's true. Some of them are wider societal reasons with sort of reflecting societal changes over a much longer period. People growing up in decades past, there was a much greater sense of community feeling, a much greater sort of sense of engaging with politics, with debates, with either community bodies or unions that got people involved in politics and in the act of voting from an early age, and that those characteristics, those behaviours have stayed with them as they've gotten older, and so old people, older age groups are much more likely to vote because they have always voted. Society has changed dramatically over the past 30, 40 years, and we've seen a decline in many of those traditional structures, much greater mobility of individuals, weaker community bonds, less engagement with parties, declining party memberships, that a lot of those traditional routes and activities and engagement with politics that older age groups had, younger age groups simply don't have in those same ways anymore. So there's some fundamental changes that have happened in society over a longer period that mean that older people are more likely to vote than younger ones. Then there's sort of changes, the changes we as individuals make as we grow up and get older. Perhaps when you're in the youngest age groups, when you can vote 18 to 24, there are fewer, because understanding of politics is limited, there are fewer things you might immediately see politics as being relevant to you, important to you for. As you get older, perhaps potentially settle down, married, have children, you start to see and engage with other bits of the system of government in the country that might give you reasons to think, oh yes, actually this politics stuff does matter. So, you're more likely to engage with the health service as you get older, with education if you're trying to get kids into schools. Once you start renting your own place or buying a house, you start caring a lot more about, rubbish collection or the quality of parks in your local area, all kinds of issues that perhaps when you're younger and it sort of doesn't seem as pressing. So as you get older, you then may find more reasons to engage with politics. So that would, in another reason why you might expect older people to be more engaged and more likely to vote.
Is political engagement among younger people getting better or worse?
One thing I would say is that the definition of political engagement is an interesting one. I think that there is certainly an interest and an appetite out there for politics, but perhaps it's not the politics of generations past. There's this distinction between formal politics and less informal routes. So things like formal politics, we might mean parliamentary activities, voting, for example, but other informal political engagement might also mean things like protests, joining campaign groups, single issue politics, which has been rising a lot more in young people. So I don't think it's necessarily that young people aren't interested, although probably Matt will tell me some different stats, but that it's seen in a different way, and that can be quite challenging for the system as it is, because it's based on a very different world. So I think if you want to get young people more interested in the formal political processes, you perhaps need to approach it in a different way and explain things a lot more, because it's not the obvious route that a lot of young people would choose to go down if they were interested in politics. They may well go on a protest, but they might not turn up to vote. And the difference between those two things is that politicians have to listen to the votes that are cast, but they don't necessarily always have to listen to the protests or the more informal routes for politics. So I think we need to make sure that there is a balance of these kind of formal activities and informal activities, because otherwise young people could be really missing out on the places where there is the most influence in our society, which is Parliament through voting, and some of these formal methods, which they may see as a bit old-fashioned, but still do have a purpose. From my perspective anyway.
I would just add to that in terms of the research we do and the annual audit of political engagement we run, if you look at engagement levels for the youngest age groups in this survey, which is 18 to 24-year-olds, if you look at them today compared to when it started 11 years ago, they're not all that different. There's no clear evidence that young people are significantly more disengaged today than they were 10 years ago, 11 years ago, but that's as far as that particular data set goes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Srinani?
So, what do you think needs to be done to improve the political engagement among young people? So, should we start with Beccy?
I think it all has to start for us at schools. I think it's really important that schools are the places that young people learn about this, because they're the one place that everyone has to go to. There is a requirement currently to learn about politics through citizenship education, but it certainly needs to be beefed up more. I think the key thing about schools is that they can provide an informal, an impartial atmosphere for talking about politics and discussing political issues. As they all have to abide by the Education Act, which talks about political balance and presenting both sides of a case, which I think is really important. A lot of the young people that we've spoken to about these kind of issues are concerned that they're not getting the full story, or that the sources they have to learn about politics are not actually that impartial. And this kind of balance of information is really important. I think you can see from the main news sources that young people mention, it is still quite traditional things like mass media, TV, radio, websites. Teachers are somewhere sixth on the list of these, but yet they are really highly trusted. I think it was YouGov and the Citizenship Foundation which did a survey of 11 to 24-year-olds about 5 years ago, and teachers were trusted by 84% of the respondents, and that's only just behind family and friends and the local family doctor. So these are trusted people who should be empowered to teach politics to students in a way that's interesting, but also shows both sides of the arguments and prepares them properly for voting and taking part in political life throughout the course of their lives. If we all start in this place, then we all start from the same page, and there is a greater chance of equality between different groups in society, because everyone has the opportunity to be interested in politics and to take part in it.
Yeah, I'd just add that we're not trying to solely criticise young people about in terms of their political engagement. Levels of understanding about politics across all age groups is really quite depressingly poor. In a survey we did last year, more than half of the public didn't know that we elect the British members of the European Parliament, which is a quite fundamental thing when we're talking at the time about a European election just around the corner, and Europe being a really big political issue that's being debated. So levels of understanding of politics across all age groups is really quite poor. And the reason we focus on citizenship education as the solution is it's the best opportunity to get that understanding across, because schools are the best place to do that. It's much harder to find ways of improving those levels of knowledge for older age groups.
And who should be responsible for engaging young people in politics?
I think I touched on this a little bit, and I think it is primarily teachers. But I think, as Matt was talking a little bit earlier about sort of normalising politics and making it part of things that we do in an everyday in everyday life. So I think having contact with campaign groups, potentially political parties, but making politics more part of what we do so that it's involved, everyone is more involved in it, would be really beneficial. But yeah, I think teachers are the ones who need to deliver the basics. But hopefully the idea is that once students understand the basics, they will be inspired to go out and take part in campaigning activities, and to potentially sort of teach their fellow students and fellow peers about why politics is important and why more people should be involved in political activities.
Shakil?
What effect does people's attitudes towards political parties have on their political engagement?
Well, the proportion of people who are members of parties has declined significantly, but the people who are still members of parties are the very most engaged with politics. The people who express a preference for any of the main political parties are generally more engaged on all the other measures of politics. They say they're more interested, feel more knowledgeable, are more likely to participate in different political activities, are more satisfied by the way the country is run than people who say that they don't support any parties. So there is some link between having some engagement with a political party, even if it's just knowing who you might vote for, and other sort of beneficial political engagement traits.
So this question is about citizenship education. You call for substantial improvements to citizenship education in your written evidence. What improvements would you like to see in particular?
Well, I mean, I'll go through some of the things that I think are issues at the moment, and it will probably become clear what needs to change. Citizenship education doesn't have the support that we really think is necessary, either from politicians across all the parties, but also from some head teachers and senior management in schools. There needs to be a much more support for citizenship education across these kind of key decision-making areas to make sure that it is seen as something that's crucial to young people's learning. But some of the problems that have arisen since the introduction of the citizenship curriculum is that the subject is not taught by specialists, which is a big problem. It's often taught by people who don't know very much about it and who aren't very confident in teaching about it. And we know this firsthand through running teacher training conferences for politics, because political literacy is the part of the citizenship education programme which is the least well taught and the least well understood. Probably because it makes teachers nervous if they don't know that much about politics themselves. But also the provision is quite patchy across different schools. They teach it in different ways. Some it's taught through PSHE and form periods, others it's a discrete subject, and it's that needing to make it a discrete subject and examined in a useful way as well. But as a subject, it's also not really understood by teachers or parents or students very well. Like I said before, this idea of citizenship tests and this kind of confusion with what it means as a school subject. For us, it's about law, it's about politics, and it's about economics. And those three things are much more understandable than the word citizenship education. So we think it may need some sort of rebranding potentially. And I think there's been some kind of uncertainty as well during the curriculum review, which has recently happened, and that's really led to a decline in support for citizenship education. A lot of senior politicians were sort of suggesting that it might not be in the statutory curriculum anymore. Fortunately, that isn't the case. It is still in the curriculum, but that kind of confusion and sort of indecision has, I think, from our experience certainly, led to teachers taking less of an interest in it as a discrete subject. Some of the projects and resources that used to be requested much more regularly are now kind of tailing off a little because citizenship education is seen as a subject sort of on the way out. So that kind of uncertainty for the last few years really hasn't helped, and I think we need the support from politicians across all parties to say, no, this is important and it should be taught in every school.
Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
I'll leave it to Beccy on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from Louise.
Is there a strong link between citizenship education and political engagement? What is the evidence to prove this?
I'm not sure that any of our evidence necessarily proves or disproves a link between citizenship education and politics in terms of the survey evidence. Our experience through the education programmes that Beccy has run does suggest that young people engaging in different forms of different more interesting activities engaging with politics does make a difference to the feedback they give us, the confidence that they say they have in the future. But in terms of measuring that long term and whether that changes their likelihood to vote or not, we don't have that evidence. From the survey evidence, there's nothing to suggest that citizenship education as a whole at the moment has made any significant difference to the levels of engagement of 18 to 24-year-olds. If it was making a difference, you might expect to see engagement among young people increasing gradually now that more and more people have had citizenship education, and there's little evidence of that. It might be that it's higher than it would be otherwise, but it's impossible to see that effect. But I don't know if you want to talk a bit about sort of the positive feedback you get from young people engaging in activities.
So it might be quite hard to track this and kind of compare it, like, as Matt said, but when you run education projects, you get a feeling for how many people are interested and involved. I mean, for example, in our mock elections for the general election in 2010, 250,000 students were actually involved, which is a high number. And we're hoping for the 2015 election to increase that to 500,000. So you can see the kind of involvement that there can be in these quite large-scale projects. Also, we have seen with a project that used to run called Heads Up, which was an online forum for young people to talk about political issues with decision makers. That these kind of projects can be a springboard for further political involvement. For example, one of the case studies that we have is that a teacher wrote to me from Kingsmead Technology College and said, that her students had taken part in one of our debates on crime, and subsequently they went through a whole kind of process of working out what the issues were with crime in their local area, and started a campaign to improve the situation, and were asked by the local councillors in the end to come and present their ideas on local crime to them, and to give recommendations about what they should do. I mean, that's a really good example that won't be in the kind of survey questions that Matt sort of runs, and it's quite hard to quantify, but we have some good feedback that political education does have these positive impacts, even if it's at quite an individual student or school level.
Also, do you think better citizenship education should be introduced before or in a conjunction with votes at 16?
I think it should be introduced before votes at 16. I think there's plenty, as Beccy has said, that we can do to improve the teaching of politics, and I think if it was really invested in, if it was really supported, if it did make a massive difference to engagement levels amongst 16 and 17-year-olds, I think the argument for votes at 16 would be strengthened if it made that difference. But as Beccy said, there are plenty of other ways that young people, before they're able to vote, can participate, can get involved. Writing to MPs and councillors, setting up petitions, all kinds of other avenues, mechanisms are available for engaging with politics, so it's not the only thing that's on the table.
Yeah, I think we would like to see it happen beforehand, so that there can be this informed debate around votes at 16, or more informed debate, and make sure that young people know what they're voting for before we're asking them to vote. I think that's really important, because you need to understand the differences between the parties and how to actually go about it before you actually do go ahead and vote. And I think it's really important that we put that element before the actual voting, because the education is obviously it's not so good once you've voted, because you need to know the details beforehand.
Do you feel that we're putting too much pressure on citizenship education? Do you really think a single subject can engage a full generation in politics?
So are we asking too much of one school subject to really solve our much bigger political engagement issues? Maybe we are, but it is the one clear avenue for making that making a difference that we've got, that we can use, that is clearly falling short of its potential at the moment. So that's where we would put the emphasis. Is it going to, even if we have a brilliant politics teaching in schools, will that solve all our problems with disengagement and lack of understanding? No, it won't, but it's where we would start, it's what we would emphasise. I can't think of a better, easier, more straightforward way to make a positive difference to political engagement levels than starting with citizenship education.
And I think the key thing is that all students should have a right to learn about politics. It's really important that young people are introduced to politics at schools, because how are you going to be interested in a subject if you don't know anything about it, or you only hear the myths from people saying all politicians are bad, or that politics is really off-putting? I think we need to try and get behind the myths. So I think making sure that all students have a right to be taught about this subject and to play their part in society is really important.
Thank you. I'll pass you on to Philip.
Matt, you mentioned that you'd start with citizenship education. Where would you go next after that?
Well, I suppose if one is trying to improve political engagement, one of the things we've found from our research in the past is that familiarity breeds favourability. Generally, the more you know about something, the more you are likely to be able to perceive it in a positive light. And as Beccy was just talking about the myths of that people have around politics, it is trying to tackle some of those damaging perceptions about what politics is, how it works, what politicians do. Trying to address those things, I'd say, are the next most important thing that one could do to improve levels of political engagement. So if it's not tackling it in schools, it's how else can we improve public understanding of politics and the work of politicians. One of the things that's actually happening at the moment is there's a documentary being made of life in the House of Commons by a fairly well-known BBC documentary maker called Michael Cockrell, who's going behind the scenes of this place to look at what politicians do and what the life of this place is like. And this is something we've been calling for and hoping for some time, because the perception, the slightly ignorant perception amongst a large chunk of the public is if they don't see their Member of Parliament sitting on the green benches over there, they are not at work. This is obviously a nonsense, as you know. Committee work like this one, which engages lots of Members of Parliament, is a really important part of their work, but it gets much less recognition for what it is, and therefore something like this documentary may make a small dent in the public's understanding in terms of, oh yes, there are other things we want our Members of Parliament to do. It's not just being in the chamber, it is committees, it is meetings, it is all the work they're doing in their constituencies, which is never on television. But if all people see is an empty green bench and they think that, MPs are slacking, then it's finding ways of tackling those misperceptions. So I think the documentary that's happening is a really good thing. I think there's all kinds of efforts that MPs and political parties should make to improve their engagement with the public. Ultimately, they're the ones who have the biggest stake in getting people engaged in politics. They have they're in the strongest position to do so. One of the things we've recommended in our most recent audit of political engagement is looking around the accountability of MPs and how what the public would want improved in terms of accountability and the relationship between the MP and the public. And this is a recommendation that's come out of our focus groups and then we've tested in survey. And the public are keen on a sort of local MP question time format, something where MPs once or twice a year had an open meeting in their constituency where they would take questions on any topic from members of the public, which and local journalists would be available to cover that. If all MPs or the majority of MPs did this at the same time, made it a big event, got national media engaged and aware of this, I think that would make a real difference in terms of the public seeing, oh yes, politics is something we can engage with in our local area. We can hold our local MP to account, and that might tackle some of the negativity, some of the myths. It's a long road to go to improving political
understanding. So just
understanding.
to clarify, you don't think there's sort of one solution, single solution beyond citizenship education? You think it then becomes a very wide responsibility?
There are no silver bullets. Even citizenship education isn't a silver bullet. It's just the best place to start, we think. And if there was one, it would be much easier to bang the drum in favour of it. But there aren't lots of sort of clear evidenced answers of this is definitely going to make a difference. It's about experimenting with new things, trying things and seeing what will tackle disengagement in the modern world.
Thank you.
If we can move on to Orson, please.
Do you think that practical activities such as mock elections are more or less valuable than classroom-based teaching in helping young people learn about politics?
I think they're both important, but I think actually giving young people a kind of a practical way through what can be quite a difficult and quite traditionally boring kind of subject is really important, because something like a mock election can involve, I would have said, all kinds of different students. You don't have to be really academic to be interested in a mock election, because there are loads of activities that are part of a campaign which are very active, quite creative, a lot about speaking and perhaps less about writing and the kind of associated learning with politics generally. And I think the fact that, as I was saying before, that 250,000 students took part in the last 2010 general election, mock elections across the country, shows just how many young people you can engage with something that is a more practical way of learning. And I mean, we've seen the same thing through Heads Up. Because it was an online forum for young people to discuss politics, it worked a lot better for certain students. Some students were quite shy, and they didn't feel able to talk about politics in the classroom. They were maybe quite quiet. But we got feedback from teachers that some of the ones that were the most active online were probably the shyest in class. So a mixture of these different methods, I think, can be really helpful, and it can engage people in different ways. So I think we do need to make sure that there is a basic understanding of how politics, the political system in Parliament works, but you can build on that in so many more interesting and exciting ways than perhaps is done in some situations.
Thank you.
Written evidence that there is a particularly acute deficit in knowledge and understanding of politics among young people. Does this mean that citizenship education has been a failure?
I don't think it's lived up to the potential it had and the sort of optimism that was surrounding it when it was introduced. It hasn't entirely failed, but there is a lot more it could have done and could do in the future. But the fact that large number of older age groups still are ignorant about many aspects of politics shows just how much of a challenge the citizenship education curriculum was always going to face. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, please.
In your written evidence, you say that any change to the voting age should come as a part of a wider debate about the age of maturity. Can you explain why?
I think the reasoning behind that point in the evidence is one of the arguments that's being put forward in terms of votes at 16 is that it's a sort of fundamental right, a fairness, and because you can do these activities at 16, you should be able to vote at 16. And as Andrew Russell, sitting here earlier on, made very clear and eloquently said, but there are other activities you can only do when you're 18, and we're setting these ones at 18. So if it's a sort of fundamental this is fairness argument, I'm not sure that argument holds unless there is one clear point at which one is becoming sort of that society's decided you're mature enough to do all of these things. There may be a need to have that debate. As Professor Russell said, we're closer to a single age of maturity now than we have been in the past. But I think if the argument is about this is necessary as a right, as fairness, then I think that wider debate around the age of maturity is really important.
Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't think so.
In which case, to build on what Matt said, do you think all rights and responsibilities of an adult should crystallise at a single age?
This isn't an area where we've particularly got any research or necessarily a fixed view. It's sort of slightly beyond the work and remit of the Hansard Society. Society at the moment seems to have differing opinions on where different rights, different enfranchisements come. As far as I know, there is no clear public will to set a single crystallising date, but that, I'm afraid, isn't really my field or our expertise.
And if something like that was to happen, what sort of evidence would you be looking for on the age that adult responsibility should accrue to people?
That, I think, you should probably be talking to sociologists, development psychologists, people with expertise in fields that aren't just political. I'm not sure what the answer would be to that one.
Sorry, if you were writing a report on votes at 16 to the government, which recommendations would you include?
I don't think you'll be particularly surprised to hear that citizenship education would be the key thing. We would probably say, call it politics, really focus on the practical elements of what politics is, how it works, how you can get involved. Try to make it more than just a subject that is taught by teachers standing at the front of the class. Make it engaging, participatory, and invest in it and believe in it and promote it and make it a core part of the school experience. Start it as early as possible and right through to 18, given the chance.
The thing that I would say is that I think we would probably call on politicians for a kind of cross-party support of this right to knowledge about politics, because I think that's been one of the issues with the recent curriculum changes, is that there was this kind of really unsure sort of approach from teachers as to whether this was actually going to still be in the curriculum in 3 years' time. So for them, why would they invest in specialist citizenship teachers if they didn't think that the subject was necessarily still going to be around in 3 years? We need politicians to be very clear that they think that this is important. And let's be frank, this is their job. They should want young people and everyone out there to understand why what they do is so important. And I think making sure that politicians from all the parties are behind citizenship and make sure that the resources and the specialist teachers and the schools are supportive of it is really the key thing. We need to make sure that this is actually this opportunity isn't lost.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time, so I would like to thank you both for coming along today to provide evidence. And as before, all the evidence you have provided will be used for our report. Thank you very much. That's the end of our committee.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Hello, Mr Slaughter. I'd like to welcome you to the British Youth Council's Youth Select Committee on Votes at 16. I would like to remind all present that if your phone is on silent, please engage with the debate on Twitter using the hashtag YouthSelect. Can you please introduce yourself?
Certainly. My name's Andy Slaughter. I'm the Labour MP for Hammersmith, and I'm one of the Shadow Justice Ministers in Sadiq Khan's team. I think my normal responsibilities are not in the constitutional area, as my colleague Stephen Twigg, but he's kindly allowed me to stand in for him today. And indeed, I have been involved with the subject quite a lot so far, and spoke for the opposition in the Westminster Hall debate earlier this year. So hopefully I can deal with your questions, though it does feel quite odd to be on this side of the... We're normally in the position of being able to ask the questions, so I will do my best.
Thank you. I'll pass you on to Theo.
We know that it is Labour Party policy to lower the voting age to 16. Can you explain why?
This has taken some time in the gestation. I think at the last election, what we were offering was a free vote to MPs. And it was only, although you could see the way that things were heading, that in Miliband, in his conference speech last year, confirmed that it would be policy, and therefore it would be something that we would expect, if we're in government, to fulfil. So it's not been it's been something that's taken place organically with a lot of discussion. And I think probably most of that discussion has been with young people. I suspect, if I'm honest, why not start a bit on, that most of the reservations around extending the franchise to 16 and 17-year-olds were about whether young people could take the responsibility of a vote. But it is a responsibility. And I think that the MPs have a lot of interaction with young people. More than most people in society. Obviously, parents do and teachers do, and so on and so forth. But in a professional capacity, we spend a lot of time in schools meeting young people, and I think that has simply persuaded us that there is no risk attached to it, and there are many advantages. I don't know if you'd like me, I'll go on and say what I think the advantages are, but I think that's basically how we've reached the decision.
And bearing in mind that within the Labour Party itself, 15-year-olds that are members can vote on party policies, why is putting votes at 16 as opposed to at 15?
Well, that is a how long is a piece of string question in a way, and one of them, I will say, probably the thing that is most often referred to when we have this debate, argued from both sides, both pro and anti, is what you can do at different ages. And I've even taken part in debates where there's been disputes about whether we're right when we say young people can get married at 16. People say, yes, but it's only with parental consent. Young people can enter the armed forces at 16. Yes, but they can't serve in a frontline capacity. So it's extremely complicated. And therefore, although I think you can establish sort of ground rules by reference to what you can do at certain ages, where there are age restrictions and when you become entitled to do things, I don't think it's a hard and fast rule. You look at the age of criminal responsibility that's moved from 14 to 10. Well, I don't think anyone's talking about 10-year-olds having the vote in that respect. I'm not saying you couldn't make an argument for 15-year-olds or 17-year-olds and putting it at that level. But I think there's a consensus around 16 because that tends to be something of a sea change in terms of responsibility, in terms of working rights, being a part of society, taking on responsibilities in that way. And you have to have a date. Obviously, I mean, the most obvious thing to say at all, there are some 15-year-olds who are considerably more mature and able and interested and informed than 17-year-olds, probably than some 50-year-olds. So, in fact, certainly than some 50-year-olds. But nevertheless, you have to have a point, don't you?
Thank you. Orson has the next question.
A major argument Labour uses to argue for votes at 16 appears to be that they have many rights and responsibilities at this age, such as being able to join the army and get married. How do you respond to those who say that the rights that accrue at 16 are often qualified, and that generally there is an upward trajectory in the ages at which young people gain rights and responsibilities?
It's a very good question. I think I've partly alluded to that because I don't accept that I accept that ages of responsibility and entitlements on rights are changing all the time, which is one reason why I don't think you can say you have to keep things under review. But I use the example of the age of criminal responsibility. I mean, in the lifetime of the last Labour government, that came down from 14 to 10. That was a very radical change in that way. Now, in some respects, in relation to, but if you look, say, in relation to, say, a relationship or emotional or sexual relationships, then that's, you could argue, is changing both ways in terms of perhaps the, both to protect children, but also to ensure that there's equality, for example, on, in relation to age of consent, being the same for homosexual relations. So I don't think that it's a point that the opponents often make, but I don't think it's actually borne out by the facts.
Okay, Shaquille has the next question.
A key argument people use to combat the things that people say against vote 16 is that people at 16 deserve the right. But do you consider voting at 16 to be a human right? And if so, why or why not?
Well, the right to, it's a very good question, whether you say a vote at a particular age is a human right. Obviously, human rights can be absolute and qualified in that way. We would say that there are many principles that are enshrined in the European Convention, which is now under the last Labour government, the Human Rights Act, and in UK law. There are absolute rights to life, right to liberty, and there are rights which require a considerable amount of interpretation by the court. You know, the rights to privacy, rights to get home life, and things like that. What does that mean in practice? So yes, you could say the right to vote is a pretty obvious human right, but the right to vote at a particular age is obviously subject to exactly the sort of debate that we're having now. But in a way, as long as you're having that debate in an open, democratic way, I think you're ensuring that human rights are preserved.
The last Labour government created the Youth Citizenship Commission, which rejected the idea of lowering the voting age. Why, 5 years later, has your policy changed?
I think what I said on my very opening comments, that I think this is an evolving debate. I said what we said at the last election was it should be a free vote. Now, free votes are quite interesting in Parliament. Often they are on matters of what are called conscience issues. You know, the death penalty, abortion, issues like that are now accepted. But sometimes they're because the parties know they can't control their own members, and they won't be able to whip them, which is the normal practice where it's policy, if it's a policy. So we've moved from one to the other. Now, I don't think in this case it was because there were concerns that there were major differences. There may be some Labour MPs who don't agree with this, and who wouldn't vote for it. But the consensus, I think, has moved over that time, even over those 5 years. And I would say, if anything has affected that, it's that we talk a lot more about democracy now and a lot more about constitutional rights, I think, than we used to. I mean, right across the board, there is more and more of an analysis of how the system works. It used to be the case that we just accepted things as they are, and we're great for tradition in this country. We've always done it in this way, and I think that process of analysis started, and the arguments were persuasive. Is the answer? The arguments was persuasive, and there are very few, I think, coherent arguments now against votes at the voting age being retained at 18. They mainly do tend to rely on that thing as, well, we've always done it this way. And so I think if you like, we're just catching up.
Thank you. Fiona?
So Mrs. Laws, last week, two of our witnesses suggested that we should actively have a referendum on the issue of whether the voting age should be lowered? And would you support this idea? Why and why not?
Well, follows on to the last point I made. Referendums are the flavour of the month now, are they not? Because we're talking about, we had one on alternative voting, we're having one in Scotland. Some parties are saying we should have one on membership of the EU. They're alien to the system of representative democracy. They're used almost without exception where you are making constitutional change, so on devolution, or in this case on independence, on going into, because obviously there is a pooling of sovereignty with the European Union in that way. I don't really see how, but that doesn't mean on every single constitutional issue. Now, we've made lots of constitutional changes, fixed-term parliaments, for example. Should we have had a referendum on that? Now, that different countries have different ways of making legislation, and if you look at California, you look at Switzerland, then referendum are hardwired into the system. Here, there's still a very strong principle that of representative democracy, i.e., you delegate to your members of parliament when you elect them rights to make decision on almost all issues over the next 5 years. And I would have thought that the voting age is clearly one of those. Certainly when it's been changed previously, including most recently going down from 21 to 18, it was done by Parliament.
So would you support it or not? And
well, I support a referendum.
Yes,
I wouldn't see a need for a
lowering
referendum on the subject. No, I mean, I can't. I don't actually think that either from supporters or opponents there's much demand for that. I think it's just not seen as one of those issues on which I think the only circumstances that would arise would be if Parliament were adamantly against, and there was a very clear majority in the country for people of all ages, and there was petitioning of such a scale that there was a clear demand. I can't see that happening, if I'm honest, because I don't think it is a number one issue with the electorate. It's an important issue, but it's not a number one issue that's going to come up. Neither is Europe, frankly, though, for that matter, so that may be a bad argument. But equally, you've got two of the three parties who are now firmly committed to it. So there is much more headway within Parliament.
Thank you. Mr. Slaughter. Evidence we received from our written evidence and our oral evidence session last week suggested that young voters do care about political issues, but are unlikely to identify with politicians and political parties. How can we channel young people's passion for politics into passion for voting?
Well, that's a good question. It doesn't just apply to young people, though. I think that there's a fracturing of the way that people approach politics that's happened over a long period of time and for a variety of different reasons. One is, I think that information is so much more widely available now, and people have many more ways of communicating, expressing their views. Another is that the adherence to one or two or three political parties has broken down, and one is that there's been a crisis of confidence in politicians, and therefore people tend to define themselves, of all ages, frankly, in terms of either local issues or regional issues, in terms of single issues that they're interested in, and in a way that's very good. I mean, it says that people are no longer passive recipients and keen and prepared to delegate everything to representatives. Because the other side of the coin to what I just said about it being a representative democracy is that it's not only a democracy for one day every 5 years. I think what you're talking about is that passion, that enthusiasm that people have goes into all the lobbying exercises and the campaigns and everything else that goes on that keeps us on our toes in that way. So I think that's all positive. The only negative side of it, and again this doesn't just apply to young people, is that people don't vote quite often. That's not a new thing, and it varies between different types of election. It turned out national elections is roughly double what it is at local European elections. So the answer has to be in terms of how do how do you attract people to actually vote, rather than, I think, as what applies to young people in particular. Yes, it is true that the turnout amongst young people is lower than it is among certain other groups of the population, but I don't think fundamentally the reasons people don't vote are different.
So how would you actually attract them to vote then?
Well, the answer to that range from compulsory voting, which hasn't tended to be very popular, because that's almost like giving up and saying we can't persuade you to vote, so we're going to make you vote. To trying, really the responsibility lies with politicians themselves in trying to make people understand the importance of voting. If I give you let me use a personal example, which is that when I was elected 4 years ago, the turnout in different parts of my constituency, and that's just within one constituency, would typically range between 50 and 75%. So within a very small part of London, you would have some wards, some areas voting almost 50% more people voting than elsewhere. And so we tried to engage particularly on issues that people cared about in those areas which weren't voting at the same level. So, I mean, for example, on issues of housing. Housing is a huge issue in London. People were, I think, in a state of despair. They didn't believe that politicians would do anything about that. We tried to convince people that yes, we could, and on issues like the NHS. Bread and butter issues, political issues, but issues which affect people's everyday lives. And the result that we saw was that the turnout in some of those underrepresented areas was then higher than in some of the traditionally high turnout areas. The answer is simply, you give people a reason for voting. You don't say vote because it's an election. You don't say vote because we're the Labour Party or Conservative, what have you. You say, if you vote, you're voting for us to do something on these issues, which are issues you care about. And secondly, it will make a difference. We will make sure that there is more affordable, decent housing in your area. We will make sure that there is decent healthcare provision. Of course, if you don't deliver on those things, that's another issue. But I actually think that, it's not rocket science, that's the way you do it.
Thank you. Louise?
Hi. How would you respond to those who say that lowering the voting age would address symptoms, not causes, of disengagement among young people?
So one of the problems of great age is deafness. Could you do that? Say that again.
How would you respond to those who say that lowering the voting age would address the symptoms, not the causes, of disengagement among young people?
I don't think anybody really argues, other than on a very sort of polemical level, those opposed to it, that the objective in lowering the voting age is to get more people voting, because it looks bad at the moment that people don't vote. It's a human rights issue. It's an issue about addressing what is an imbalance in the system at the moment. It's reviewing the age, which is only reasonable. I think what you're conflating two things here. You're conflating that issue of principle, if you like, as to what the vote age should be, with the previous question, which is that there is a lack of engagement across the board, but particularly perhaps with young people. I don't think it's going to be particularly any better or worse with 16 and 17-year-olds than it is with 18 or 19-year-olds when it comes to persuading people to vote, because they're quite likely sort of in full-time education. They're perhaps just as likely to be politically engaged or not politically engaged. So I would say that there's two separate issues that you address them in different ways.
At the last evidence session, first-time compulsory voting was suggested. What is your opinion on that in relation to votes to 16?
Do you mean just voting, only to be compulsory the first time you vote, or all the times you vote?
The first time, or just the first time? Okay, just the first time.
That sounds a bit prejudicial, if you like, in saying that we trust everybody else to go and vote, but not 16 or 17 or whatever age you first vote at. I think it's not. I don't think any party's policy at the moment to have compulsory voting. I think it's a debate that we should have, because they do have it in some countries, in Australia and other countries, and it doesn't seem to cause any difficulty. It doesn't seem people think that it's a massive infringement of their human rights. I think probably the argument against it is it does show politicians, as I said earlier, have given up, and they can't persuade you for the best reasons to go and vote, and therefore they'll say, well, we're just going to make you do it. I think if you then extend that to say, well, we're not going to make everybody else do it, we'll make young people do it, it's probably the easiest way to turn young people off voting, and they might then have to go. Of course, if you don't have to actually vote, you presumably you go and you spoil your ballot paper, or you write nothing on it, or something of that kind. I don't think that's the best way to introduce young people to citizenship and to the idea of voting. I think that would be, as I say, unfair.
Brandon?
Mr. Slaughter, we've received a lot of evidence that suggests that political parties and governments design their policies to attract older voters to the detriment of young voters. Do you think that's fair?
I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that in the most private and political of meetings, that we're going to do this because the turnout amongst older people is so much higher. Therefore, if we gravitate towards their needs or their prejudices, then it's going to be electorally advantageous. But you can't say that it doesn't happen subliminally. That if you're aware that and it's not just voting, but correspondence, the ability to lobby and things of that nature, of course they have an effect. It's something that the best politicians ought to mitigate, so they're not only succumbing to the interests of people who shout loudest or the most powerful lobby groups. But the answer, of course, to the question is that young people themselves have to make their voices heard. Again, it comes back to the point I said earlier about us persuading the electorate, particularly young people in this context, that politics makes a difference to their lives. If you think about it, of course it does. And actually, I do think, particularly under the current government, but perhaps previous governments as well, young people can be an easier target when you're looking to make savings, when you're looking to introduce more draconian policies, and that may be because they are a less protected group, if you like, than pensioners or older people, but it may be for the reason you give, that they're not punching their weight.
Do you think previous Labour governments have done that?
I would hope not, although I'm sure you'll then give me loads of examples of where they have done. I think that, and again, that may be for self-interested reasons, in the sense that the voting profile of the different age groups, more younger people tend to vote Labour proportionately, more older people tend to vote Conservative. So it would be somewhat perverse if the Labour government hadn't responded in that way. Most of the advances, I think, for young people, like constitutional things like lowering the voting age, which was done under a Labour government, about increasing both time and facilities in education, have been done under a Labour government. I would hope that Labour had quite a good record on youth policy generally. But
do you think that if 16-year-olds had the vote, would the coalition have raised university fees to £9,000?
That's a hypothetical question that's always very difficult to answer. I think, if I'm honest about it, I think they probably would have done, and they would have done it because, first of all, certainly as far as the Liberal Democrats are concerned, it is still seen, I think it's gone down in legend as one of the great political betrayals of all time. So if they were prepared to do it on that basis, if we all signed the pledge, they were probably prepared to do it in relation to 16, 17-year-olds as well, who of course in many ways are the most effective people as they're just coming up to university age. Politicians also have a habit of making difficult and unpopular decisions at the beginning of their terms in the hope that people have forgotten them by the end of it, by 4 years later. I think in that case, that hasn't happened. I think because perhaps of the huge amount of money that's have to been paid, and the fact that people are still coming into paying that, or still on courses where they're paying it for the first time, that is something that will damage the current government at the polls. But I think the general point you make is absolutely right. One of the reasons, it may not be the issue of principle, but one of the practical effects of young people at 16 and 17 having the vote is that politicians will have to pay more regard to their interests when they make policy.
So do you think if 16-year-olds had the vote, would the Labour government introduce tuition and top-up fees?
Well, I suppose my answer is the same as before, which is that these things are always, I mean, politicians weigh up everything. They weigh up money, but they weigh up whether they're going to get re-elected. They weigh up putting it in the board, so whether they're going to get away with it or not, you know, and then they make a decision. So I suspect probably, as indeed has proven to be the case, whichever party had been in power, if it had been the other way around, Conservatives first and then us, we would be in an era, regrettable though that is, of people paying costs and fees for higher education. The issue is more to do with how you pay it, how much, and under what circumstances.
Thank you. Can Jack ask the next question, please?
Good afternoon. In a recent parliamentary debate, you said that the next Labour government will create schools that nourish real civic duty and democratic understanding. How do you plan on doing that?
Yeah, that's completely beyond my remit, because that's a matter for the education team. So I probably should have said that, but I did, so I'll ask the question. We introduced citizenship education. The current government says they don't see a need for it. I think they're wrong about that. I don't think that and voting 16 and 17 are completely interdependent, but clearly it is beneficial to, and at the time we introduced it, of course, we didn't have a policy of voting 16 and 17. The reason we introduced citizenship education, the reason why I think we will want to go further, is I think there is much more of an understanding now that people are going out into a very complicated world without a great awareness of their rights and responsibilities. Now, there's only a certain time that you have in education, and most of that is going to be spent in the way it's always been spent, in terms of learning. But I think there is and I think it's a very regressive step for the current government to say that it doesn't support that, because I think that teaching people about, both historically, if you like, about how rights come about. Magna Carta next year, huge debate on whether we should repeal the Human Rights Act at the moment, which is a Conservative Party policy, about that many things we just take for granted in this country are the product of years, centuries sometimes, of struggle to get where we are, and that includes on the franchise. I was thinking on the way here that my father left school at the age of 13 in 1931, and that was 3 years after the universal suffrage was introduced for women. So it's, we're not talking about long periods of time in terms of living memory before as to when rights came about. And I think it's important that whether it's part of a history syllabus or whether it's part of a citizenship syllabus, that is taught and there is an understanding of that.
Thank you. I'll pass you to Sadia.
Good afternoon, Mrs. Slaughter. This question is about citizenship education. We have received evidence suggesting that there should be more politics teaching with citizenship teaching. Do you agree, and why?
I think, well, I think I partly answered that, but I don't think that, I think the word politics is quite a turn-off for people. And yet, I probably going to a couple of schools a week. People come here as well as me going to schools in the constituency, and I find a great interest in what I would call politics, but they may not, at not just 16 and 17, but even in primary schools. And I'm not exaggerating there at all. I get some of the most difficult and the most thoughtful questions when I go into primary schools. So what that says to me is that there is both an interest and a willingness and a capability there, and therefore we, as politicians and educators, should be responding to that by providing the materials to do that. So I think that's very important. I'm just not sure you would call it politics.
Thank you. Pass you on to Thea.
This question is with regards to votes at 16 and the rest of the United Kingdom. The Edinburgh Agreement allows 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in this referendum. Why are they considered capable of choosing the future of their country, but not the result of other elections and referendums?
Yeah, I think this was just a deal done as part of the negotiations between the Scottish government and the UK government in relation to the referendum. It was something which the SNP government was keen on, and I think they were right to. I don't know what their motivation was. They obviously, part of the, I think it was as simple as that, it was a political deal. The current government, or at least the majority part of the current government, the Conservative part, does not support voting at 16 and 17. But as part of the terms that were agreed, it was that. So I don't think there was anything profound about it. There still is a difference of, I can't speak for what the SNP thought. The Conservatives are on record as saying they do not believe in lowering the voting age generally, and I suppose therefore it was simply a compromise arrived at.
You keep referring to it as a deal, but what do you think that this government got in return for giving the votes to 16-year-olds in the referendum?
I don't know. I think that's in some smoke or not smoke-filled room between Mr Salmon's representatives and Mr Cameron's representatives. I mean, there was a lot of debate around timing, around the question about whether there should be a second question that would have extended devolution but not gone quite as far as independence. And I suspect there was some give and take there, and that this was some of the give as far as Cameron was concerned. It must be right that that they would not want to have conceded that because they don't believe in voters at 16 and 17 full stop. But clearly they were prepared to do it in this instance.
Thank you. Moving on, the Welsh Government and Northern Ireland Assembly wish to reduce the voting age to 16. Would a Labour government devolve the power for them to do this?
Oh, I definitely can't answer that. That's definitely outside my remit, isn't it? We would support the, obviously, it would be inconsistent not to support voting at 16 in all elections. Because I think another question that I've been asked previously is, should this just be for certain types of election? And that may sound bizarre, but actually, I think I'm right in saying that when women were allowed to vote for the first time, it was at local elections, but they weren't allowed to vote at national elections. I hope we've moved on from those days. So it would be wholly anomalous. I know we have the anomaly of voting in the Scottish referendum, but I think if we do manage to establish, and I believe we will establish, voting at 16 and 17 in the next Parliament, because I think most trends suggest that there will be a majority for that, it would be wholly anomalous not to allow it for any parts of the UK.
And votes at 16 was in the manifesto in 2010, as you've mentioned before, as a free vote. Could you tell us what would the Labour Party's policy be going forward in the manifesto for the next general election?
Well, I haven't seen, it hasn't been written yet, but I think it's pretty clear from what my boss, Sadiq Khan, has said, but also what Ed Miliband said, there will be a clear commitment that it will be policy. And as I've said, the difference between a free vote, what I can't remember, if I'm being honest, is why it was a free vote. I suspect because, for the reason I gave earlier on, which is it was an evolving policy, and we weren't ready, if you like. We are now ready to say that we support it as a party. It therefore will be in the manifesto as policy, and therefore, if we're in a position to do so, either as a majority Labour government or that we're able to command a majority in Parliament on that issue, that we will introduce it in the next Parliament.
So it would be a whipped vote?
Yes, that's what it means, yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just referring back to one of the previous points you made, you said that young people make an easier target in relation to budget cuts. why do you think young people make an easier target? Is it because they're less likely to vote?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I think what I was saying is that I certainly think during the current Parliament that has been the case. I cannot say, because I cannot look inside the minds of the people who are making policy at the moment, whether that is because they think either that more older people vote or more older people vote for them, and therefore they can get away with cutting services, putting financial burdens and restrictions on young people more. I suspect that that's true, if I'm honest, but I can't prove it. I think it's wrong. I think it's the wrong way to approach politics. That doesn't mean that a Labour government would always do things which young people find acceptable or pleasant or anything else. But I think that it only increases people's cynicism about politics if they think that people are making decisions not on their merits, but for some electoral advantage or for some ulterior motive.
Well, this is a question which we put to all of our witnesses. If you were writing a report to the current government regarding votes at 16, which recommendations would you include?
What would I say about voting at 16?
Yeah,
Well, I mean, I can only just restate what policy is. It's I'm bound by collective responsibility. Fortunately, I agree with the policy. So which is to say, I think I'm personally convinced. The party is obviously convinced that it is appropriate that 16 and 17-year-olds have the right to vote now. I would hope, having heard all the evidence you have, that the preponderance of evidence. There's a big debate going on across all areas of policy now about what we call evidence-based policy, and whether the policy which government is putting into practice is based on sound research and evidence. And that could be statistical, it could be sociological studies, but it could be anecdotal. It could be the experience I've talked about of us going out as politicians and meeting young people and being persuaded that they have the maturity, the interest, the ability to have the franchise. And once you're persuaded of that, it really becomes a non-issue. And I actually, it's one of those issues I now have quite difficulty understanding the other side of the argument. So I think we've moved on a long way, and I would hope that the preponderance of evidence that you've heard would support that there are good reasons for having votes at 16 and 17, but also that the political mood and the mood in society has changed, as it has on so many other issues, as it has on many other social and political and constitutional issues, from devolution to gay marriage, and that therefore the time is right. And that would be what you would reflect in your report.
Well, once again, the committee would like to thank you for coming today to give us your insight into votes at 16, and all the evidence which you provided will be used in our report. That is the end of this committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome you to the British Youth Council's Youth Select Committee on Votes at 16. Thank you for coming, Mr Brake. I would like to remind everyone present that you can engage with the debate on Twitter regarding Votes at 16 by using the hashtag YouthSelect. Please can you introduce yourself?
I'm Tom Brake. I'm the Member of Parliament for Carshalton and Wallington. I've been a Member of Parliament for 17 years and I'm Deputy Leader of the House of Commons and I'm a Liberal Democrat Member of Parliament.
Thank you very much. I'm going to pass you on to Philip for our first question.
As we know, it's been Liberal Democrat policy since 2001 to lower the voting age to 16. Why was the decision made to adopt this policy?
The decision was made to adopt this policy because we believe that, and I'm talking as a Liberal Democrat, and I think I perhaps should make it clear at the outset that I'm wearing two hats. I'm a Liberal Democrat, but I'm also the Government Minister who is responding to you this afternoon. And the government's position is different from the Liberal Democrat position. But the Liberal Democrats, we feel that 16-year-olds are mature enough to take part in the electoral process. Certainly my own sort of experience of working with young people of that age group is that there is a demand for it, not universal. I must say there are, even amongst the 16 and 17-year-old age group, there are differing views, but I think there is strong demand for the right to participate in elections, and clearly, as you know, there are many other things that young people can do at 16, which I think demonstrates a degree of maturity.
If the Liberal Democrats are so strongly in favour of votes at 16, why did it not make it into the coalition agreement?
Well, I think that's true of many other policies that we have advocated, and indeed the Conservative Party have advocated. When two parties form a coalition, what they have to do is they have to identify policies which both of the parties support. And clearly the Conservative Party doesn't support votes at 16. There is a certain amount of leeway within a coalition for one party to put forward perhaps a proposal that they know that the other party doesn't fully support as a quid pro quo perhaps for another policy that the other party wants to get through, knowing that their coalition partner doesn't support it. So I think what we had in terms of our manifesto was some clear priorities, such as ensuring that the tax allowance was increased to £10,000 so that people everyone in work could earn £10,000 before paying any tax. So it was the top priorities in our manifesto that we ensured were embedded in the coalition agreement. We were not able to deliver in relation to votes at 16 because it's something the Conservatives were implacably opposed to.
So was votes at 16 actually discussed as part of the coalition agreement?
Well, I wasn't party to those discussions. What I imagine happened is that there was a fairly detailed discussion that took place between the key players on both sides, looking at different areas of policy, and clearly in relation to the whole arena of political and constitutional reform, there was detailed discussions about that, and I would have expected votes at 16 to have been picked up as part of that discussion.
So why is it Liberal Democrat policy to choose 16 as the age when your members who are 15 within the party can vote on issues of policy at your meetings?
Well, it's interesting looking at some of the evidence. There was a suggestion that perhaps the younger party members are treated differently. As you've identified, that's not the case, certainly within the Liberal Democrats. But I think if you look at across a broad range of issues about whether young people are able to do certain things at a certain age, there is a difference. There are discrepancies. Clearly, there are people who would advocate that if you give the vote at 16, then you should bring in line every other perhaps age qualification, whether it's for drinking, for driving, for smoking. But personally, I think a more pragmatic approach where you adopt a certain age for instance, voting. I am comfortable with also adopting a different age in terms of when young people are able to buy cigarettes, for instance.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Shiku.
Can I just say the acoustics in this room are not brilliant, so if you could speak up, that would be helpful.
Sure. We've heard evidence that there is generally an upward trajectory in the ages at which responsibility would accrue to young people. Do you think that this is the case in the current government's policy, and why do you think this trend has happened?
Yes, I mean, that sort of partly touched on that in the earlier response. Clearly, with things like the ability to buy cigarettes, there has been a change in that was increased from 16 to 18 on health grounds, and I've certainly supported that. And yes, I suppose you could argue that reducing the age of voting to 16 would go counter to that trend. I think the decisions that have been taken in relation to cigarettes, I think there are very strong health grounds on which those were taken, and the same reasons in relation to using sunbeds, for instance. So I think sometimes where there is a strong health impact, then I think it's legitimate to increase the age. But I don't see a problem, as I said earlier in response to Mr. Robinson's question, I don't see a problem with, in relation to voting, reducing the age of voting to 16.
Do you think there should be a general review of the ages of responsibility, perhaps into a single age for all positions of responsibility? Or
again, I mean, in response to the earlier question, I said that I'm more pragmatic about it. I don't think that there is a fundamental problem with adopting different ages for the ability to drive, the ability to drink, or indeed the ability to vote. I think to say we're automatically going to coalesce around 16 or 17 or 18, I don't think there's any particular logic to that. Clearly it would be neater, perhaps, and easier to understand, but I don't think it's necessary to do that. I think we can be pragmatic and we can adopt different ages for different types of activities.
Even if for things like jury service might contradict what we're trying to say about what you're trying to say about vote 16.
I think what you've correctly highlighted is that whilst in itself votes at 16 you can neatly contain it, when you start to look at the potential repercussions, then it has a wider impact, which might then require issues like that to be looked at, and associated with that the whole age of candidacy as well, because obviously if you were to reduce the age of voting to 16, then you then have a question mark over candidacy.
Thank you. The next question is from Joe.
Mr. Craig, do you think that 16-year-olds are mature enough to vote, and why?
I think they are, and that's why as a party and personally I advocate votes at 16, although clearly it is not government policy to do that. I have quite extensive contact with young people in the constituency. I was just drawing up a list as I was doing my preparations yesterday, and I used the hashtag YouthSelect, hopefully, which some of you will have spotted, to announce the fact I was doing that. And so I have regular school visits that I've done recently at Carshalton Boys, Queen Mary's. I'm going to John Fisher in a couple of weeks' time. I took part at Carshalton Boys in a rock and roll event that they'd had organised there. I have people who come in regularly to do work experience in my office. I have school groups who come up to Westminster who meet me after they've been on a tour. I regularly meet with school councils. Often I get casework raised with me by young people, and that is dealt with in exactly the same way as if an adult were to raise the issue with me. I have regular question time. I have a question time which I've organised in a couple of weeks' time, which the schools will be invited to send, or at least to publicise in case they want to send people to those events. I attend career fairs, and I've hopefully got someone from Sutton Youth Parliament, Cameron, who is here today, who I believe will be shadowing me for some time in Parliament. So through those fairly extensive contacts, I meet 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds on a regular basis, and certainly in the discussions that I have in a range of schools, my view is that those young people are mature enough to take part in an election, contrary perhaps to to the public perception that young people are disinterested in politics. That's certainly not my experience. Maybe they are perhaps not attracted by some of what they see in terms of House Commons coverage, for instance, but I think they are interested. I know they're interested in political issues, whether it's issues that affect them directly in terms of the amount of money that's spent on schools, or whether it's environmental issues or issues to do with overseas aid. So yes, in short, I do think they're mature enough.
Thank you.
I'll pass you on to Orson.
Do you consider voting to be a human right? And if you do, when do you think this right should be implemented?
Yes, I think that everyone should have the right to participate in an electoral process, and I think 16, as I've stated, is the appropriate age. And although people may not feel that the electoral process always delivers what they would want, in practice, it is one of the ways of seeking to influence government, whether it's local government through council elections, whether it's national government, whether it's the European Parliament. Taking part in the electoral process is key to that, and I think it is a right that we all have, and I also think it's a right that we should all exercise.
Based on what you've just said, do you believe that the low turnout amongst young people affects this right?
Low turnout amongst young people, my worry is that although I think all politicians, we know that we represent everybody in our constituencies. It doesn't matter how old or how young they are, we are there to represent them, and we all do that to the best of our ability. In practical terms, however, what politicians also do is that we identify people who we know take part in elections. And we are more likely to engage in a dialogue with people who have recently taken part in an election, for instance, than if we identify someone who consistently, in the last 3, 4, 5 elections, has chosen not to vote. Because we make the calculation that the person who's voted recently is more likely to take part in a future election, and it's more potentially more productive from an electoral point of view to engage with that person. I think that's a decision probably that all politicians of all parties make. We've got limited resources, limited time, and therefore we will focus on the people who we know take part in elections.
Yeah, that's a question.
Based on what you've just said, it sounds like there's a vicious cycle going on where young people won't vote, therefore politicians won't target their policies towards them. We've heard about that from other witnesses, but you seem to have acknowledged it. So do you think it's okay that politicians seem to be actively engaging in this vicious cycle instead of trying to do something to address it, to get people back on board, young people back on board?
Well, first of all, hopefully I set out for you the sorts of things that I do as an individual member of Parliament in terms of trying to make politics relevant to younger people and to engage them actively in the political process. So I personally don't feel that I neglect that duty or that responsibility of mine to highlight the importance of politics, the importance of the decision makers, and the importance of trying to influence them. But at the same time, I know that as a Member of Parliament, we've got an election in 11 months' time. I know that there are 40,000 households in my constituency, and I know that the turnout will be roughly 65% at the next general election, and that there will be some people, and it's not necessarily young people, sometimes it's older people in their 60s or 70s who have never voted. If I have got limited time and I want to try to talk to as many people as possible before the next general election, if someone has not voted in the last 10, 15, 20 years, then I'm going to focus on the people who do engage in the process because I need their support to secure re-election.
But surely the demographic of young people changes over 10, 20 years. So it has to be something that's repeatedly keeping them disengaged, if that makes sense. Because the same people that are 18 to 24 15 years ago aren't the same people that are 18 to 24 now. See what I mean?
Yes, no, I accept that. And I suppose I don't through the things that I'm doing. So, for instance, through Facebook, which is very a means of communicating with young people that they are more they're more reliant on, or at least they use in a way that perhaps older people would use a fixed phone line. They use Facebook, and I use that as a means of engaging with the maximum number of people that I'm allowed to, 5,000, and through Twitter as well. So I am in dialogue with predominantly young people through Facebook, probably predominantly through Twitter with young people. I always make a point of using that in a way that is interactive. I don't simply broadcast a message through Facebook or Twitter and then just say that's it, that's the end of the story. If people respond, as they often do, either challenging me, raising queries, raising casework, then I will respond to that as well. So I am using social media in a very active way to try to engage with people who perhaps haven't participated in the electoral process. But when it comes to things like, for instance, direct mail, then that will predominantly be going to people who have voted, because I've got limited funds to spend on a campaign, and it's better, if I'm spending money on it, to spend it on people who are actively participating in elections.
Thank you.
Brandon has a question.
Mr. Brady, you stated that the work a lot of the work that you do in your constituency, and just now, and how you interact on Facebook and Twitter, does the government encourage its MPs to interact in a similar way with young people? If not, why doesn't it?
I don't think that's the sort of things that I've just referred to in terms of Facebook and Twitter. I don't think that's necessarily a government responsibility. To some extent, that is the responsibility of each and every single individual member of Parliament to do. Clearly, it is their choice how they choose to engage with people, whether it's through writing a column in their weekly local newspaper or through Facebook. So I think that's principally a responsibility of the individual members of Parliament. What does happen is that the different political parties will certainly publicise what is best practice within their party in terms of using things like social media to try and encourage other members of Parliament within their party to do that. And separate to that, the government, so now talking as a minister, the government do invest in things like registration programmes or organisations that are trying to encourage registration to get people onto the register, and with things like rock and roll to explain or to underline the importance of being registered, to ensure that people realise that really the starting point is registration, and if you're not registered, then you're not going to be participating in many of the key decisions that we're going to be taking as a country in future years.
Good afternoon. Two of our witnesses last week suggested that we should have a referendum on the issue of whether the voting age should be lowered to 16. What do you think of this idea?
Well, from a government perspective, there is no, as you know, there is no move towards votes at 16, and for that reason, the government would not support the idea of a referendum on this subject. I suppose an additional factor which the government would have to take into account is the cost associated with it, with referenda, which is not insignificant, and also perhaps to some extent whether there's any election fatigue that people might feel about taking part in repeated elections, which certainly in recent years seems to have had a sort of downwards trend in terms of participation in elections, rather than a sort of renewed enthusiasm for taking part in them.
Other witnesses last week suggested that voting should be compulsory for first-time voters. Do you agree, and if so, why or why not?
I don't agree with the idea of compulsory voting for first-time voters or for other voters for that matter. And I suppose that as a Liberal or a Liberal Democrat, I have a fundamental problem with anything that is compulsory. If I think that the responsibility is on politicians to make politics relevant and attractive in a way that encourages people to go out and vote, rather than it be compulsory for them to do that. And I certainly think that requiring compulsory voting for first-time voters, when it wouldn't be compulsory for other voters, I think it would be a significant problem, an even greater problem in terms of saying to one group of voters, you've got to vote, and to another group, you don't have to. So no, I wouldn't favour that, and I think fundamentally it's illiberal to require people to do something that they don't necessarily want to do, and is unlikely, I think, to lead to a particularly thought through response. If people are required to go and vote, and perhaps as it happens in other countries, they are fined if they don't, then I think you can probably guess that some people's reaction when they get to the polling station won't necessarily be to look down the list of candidates and try and work out which one do they want to support. They might actually just tick the first one, tick the last one, or tick the one whose name they think is the most attractive on the list. So I don't think it will lead to very good, sound decision making in all cases.
Okay,
thank you. Louise has our next question.
Hi. What do you think the reasons are for why young people are less likely to vote than older people to vote? Yeah.
In many ways, I know you're questioning me, but I'd like to turn that question round to you. I suspect that everyone here will take part, or would want to take part in elections if you were able to vote at 16, or indeed when you reach 18. Clearly that is not the case for many young people. Why do they not participate to the same extent as older people? I think I alluded to perhaps the style of politics. I think the style of politics that people see, if the only thing you ever see about politics is Prime Minister's questions, then that is giving you a very false impression of what politics is like. Politics is much more like what we're doing now, where you have a group of informed people asking someone who has a certain amount of expertise in a particular area questions, probing questions, and it's a sensible dialogue. That is not what Prime Minister's questions about, but that happens only once a week for half an hour. The rest of the parliamentary business is much more business-like, is much less yaboo, and often is much more consensual, where you will actually get politicians, not just the coalition parties who you'd expect to work together most of the time, but also the opposition parties sometimes agreeing collectively a way forward, which is what happens, of course, with select committees, where invariably select committees always seek to come up with a consensual report which all of the members of Parliament from all of the parties, cross-party, can support. So maybe it's the style of politics. I think often young people, and to some extent this was my case, I got involved in single issue campaigns in my early 20s. So I was involved in Greenpeace. I was involved in where I was living in North London. There was a nuclear waste train that took nuclear waste through London, so I was involved in a campaign in trying to stop that train running through a very heavily populated area. But a few years later, I decided that in terms of my ability to have an impact on something like the environment, that actually politics was potentially a better way of achieving change than remaining involved in single issue groups.
Thank you.
I mean, I don't know whether you want to, if I'm allowed to ask questions, whether you want to. I mean, no. Do you, Louise, feel disengaged with politics? I think the fact that you're here probably means that...
Sorry.
I'm not allowed to.
No, this will be published in a report later on.
Right.
Sorry. Sadia.
Good afternoon, Mr. Brake. You've mentioned from an individual perspective how you actively use social media as a way of interacting with young people. But what has the government done as a whole to improve political engagement of young people?
Well, the government's obviously, the citizenship within the curriculum is important, a very important part of what the government are trying to do. And the focus in terms of citizenship education programme I think is being switched perhaps to a greater focus on the political process, political institutions, voting in a way that is much more focused on I think the sorts of issues that you're debating here, whereas previously perhaps the citizenship programme was more focused on themes and more general issues as opposed to the very specifics about politics, about constitution, about how political parties work.
So bearing that in mind, would you say that engaging young people in politics was a priority in the government?
I think at the moment, to be fair, I think the government, what we set out to do in 2010 was turn around a very disastrous economic position that the country was in, with the largest deficit in the industrialised world. So that has been our focus for the last 4 years. So it's been a focus on jobs and growth, but clearly we want to. The government want to engage with young people around a whole number of issues, including the political process, and that's why I'm very happy to be here in front of you, taking questions around the very important issue of votes at 16.
Thank you.
Evidence which we received last week suggested that young people are concerned about political issues such as climate change and the economy, but are put off by party politics. What more do you think that politicians can do to gain the trust of young people?
I understand that concern, and that's why I suppose a lot of young people, as I did, get involved in single issue campaigns. But I think political parties, I think one thing that I can say, I think of all, virtually every single member of Parliament that I have ever met of all political parties are involved in politics because they want to change things, because they have a vision of how they would like to see our country develop. So I know politicians get a bad press, but in practice I think overwhelmingly as a group we are committed to improving people's lot. As I said, I know that sometimes how we are perceived, how we're portrayed, and indeed occasionally how we act doesn't necessarily help raise our, demonstrate our probity and so on. But I think we are collectively committed to improving the way the country is run. I mean, how can we sell that to young people? I'm not allowed to ask your views, Mr. Hope, but I'm sure that in your report, when you summarise, there'll be some key proposals to do that. But I think, for instance, being involved, having a citizenship programme that engages young people in debates around political issues, perhaps explains why some of the decisions that have been taken, for instance, in recent years, had to be taken, explains perhaps some of the issues around a coalition. I think one of the difficulties that perhaps people face, and this isn't just young people, I think people generally face around the practicalities of how a coalition works, don't because we've not had a coalition in the UK for 70 or 80 years, are not familiar with the idea that in a coalition you will have, for instance, two parties which came forward with programmes which often in many respects were quite significantly different, haven't, in the case of both the Conservative Party and the Liberal Democrats, haven't been able to deliver key parts of our core programme and what we've been committed to over many years. But that is the reality of a coalition, and I think as part of a citizenship programme, looking at how coalitions work in other countries where perhaps they've got a tradition of working in coalition, could reinforce the understanding of how ground has to be given, how consensus has to emerge, and how it's not possible in a coalition for parties to deliver everything that they had previously been committed to and would have attempted to deliver if they had been a sole party in government.
You of course support votes at 16, but why does it actually matter that young people vote?
Well, I think that it matters that everyone votes, regardless of whether they're 16 or 69. Our political system is imperfect, of course, but the key way, or one of the key ways that people have to influence the decision makers is to take part in a political process. And no doubt in Scotland, for instance, where 16 and 17-year-olds will be taking part in the referendum, that is a very significant opportunity, I think, for those young people to have a very loud say in what the future of Scotland is going to be. I think that's perhaps currently the most concrete demonstration of why it is important to take part in elections. The future of Scotland, whether you favour an independent Scotland as a nation, or whether, as I do, you favour Scotland staying within the United Kingdom as an integral part, that is a key decision, probably for the Scots, perhaps the most important decision they're going to take in their lifetimes. That's why it's important to take part in elections.
Thank you. 390 has the next question.
So it's good to have you here, Mr. Brake. So it's not the young people that are supposed to be answering your questions. It's your responsibility to kind of answer them as a politician. So on to my question. On the Youth Select Committee...
And hopefully I've done that. Answered your questions.
Yeah, we'll see. So on the Youth Select Committee, we have received evidence that suggests that political parties and governments kind of design their policies to attract older voters over kind of attracting younger voters. Do you think that this is fair?
No, I don't think it would be fair if indeed that is what is happening, that if political parties are consciously deciding we want to put all the money that we've got into ensuring that pensions are larger just because we know that pensioners are more likely to vote, that would be wrong. And I don't think any of the political parties do that perhaps in the calculated way that you're suggesting. If you look at, and talking as a Liberal Democrat rather than as a government minister, if you look at the sorts of issues that we have focused on in governments, things like free school meals for reception and infants, or free childcare for 3 and 4 year olds, or free childcare for disadvantaged 2-year-olds, that is not a policy that is focused on senior citizens. That is a policy which we as a party want to ensure that investment goes in at an early years stage, because all of the evidence is that if you spend money on good childcare for a 2 or 3 or a 4-year-old, the impact on them longer term the positive impact on them longer term is dramatic. And some would argue, including, for instance, Labour MP Graham Allen, that actually that investment should be happening before they're 2, and you should actually be looking at babies, or indeed pregnant mothers, and trying to get to deal with, if there are going to be issues, to deal with them as early as you can. So the conscious decision that we took was to invest significantly in early years funding, and that is not a policy that clearly would be particularly attractive or directly relevant to senior citizens.
Okay, so why do you think there is such a popular kind of like a belief that that the politicians favour older voters in order to get their votes?
It goes back to the conversation we were having earlier. It is partly because politicians, as I said, when you've got a range of things that you can do as a politician. You haven't got, if you're campaigning, you haven't got a limitless pot of money, so you use that in a way that is most productive. Social media is fantastic because it's free or thereabouts. I mean, it's not free in terms of having 5,000 friends and I think 12,000 followers on Twitter. That does actually require time, and I must confess it's not me all of the time who's dealing with all the things that come through Facebook or Twitter. It does require time, people time to deal with it, whereas things like delivering a letter to someone, talking to them about a particular issue which I know is significant for them, that is more likely, because of the heavy cost involved with writing a letter, sending a letter directly to someone, that is more likely to be delivered to someone who has a voting record. And as you know, young people, I think 24% or 25% have said they're likely to vote in the next general election. Probably, I don't know whether that poll looked at what the likelihood to vote for 65 or older was, but it's probably double that. And so we will make the decision about engaging in a dialogue with people who are more likely to vote. And that is regrettable, but in the reality is with limited funds, that's what you do.
So would having a higher voter turnout amongst younger voters make you want to change your kind of the policies to favour younger people more?
If there was a higher, in practical terms, what would happen is if there was a higher turnout amongst young people, and there were clearly people with a track record of voting at 1, 2 or 3 elections, then they are more likely to be contacted. They're more likely, their views are more likely to be sought. They won't be, if they're, as I stated earlier, people who don't take part in the political process aren't excluded in that they can be on Facebook, they can follow me on Twitter, and they can respond to that. So there's that level of engagement, but there's just a little bit more in terms of people who are actually taking part in the electoral process. So there would be better engagement with younger people if they had a consistent voting record. Yes, there would be.
Thank you. Yeah.
How would you respond to those who say that lowering the voting age would address the symptoms but not the causes of disengagement among young people?
By simply lowering the voting age, I agree that would not suddenly get young people of 16 and 17 to vote in huge numbers. Clearly it wouldn't do that. There's no reason to believe it would. Obviously we have votes at 18, and yet the number of young people of 18 who do not participate in elections is very high. So I accept that it wouldn't be the total solution to a problem of perhaps under-engagement, but I think it is part of the solution. And although, again, paradoxically, it would lead to a reduction in turnout, probably, because the evidence from other countries is that where there are votes at 16 and 17 is that the percentage of 16 and 17-year-olds who vote is lower than the rest of the voting population, and therefore the turnout, because you're looking at the total number of people who are able to vote, the turnout will actually go down if 16 and 17-year-olds take part in elections. But if you, as I do, if you believe that it is right to offer votes at 16, then I think the fact that the average turnout is going to go down is neither here nor there, because the principle, in my view, is the right one, and therefore it should be supported. How do we get people to be more involved? I've referred to lots of things that are happening in terms of, I was very impressed with the rock and roll programme. So this happened at Coshorton Boys School, where someone from Bite the Ballot came to run the programme, and if you may have done similar things in your schools, and it was a sort of scenario where it was about the death penalty, and you went on that side if you supported it, that side if you didn't support it. There were far more people on the side of not supporting it, but then they pulled out of the audience the 60% who allegedly hadn't registered to vote on the against the death penalty side. So suddenly the odds were actually stacked in favour of those who favoured the death penalty, because they are the ones who had registered to vote. So I think programmes like that can make a significant difference in terms of engaging people where they're doing citizenship at that age, can highlight what it means in terms of not being registered, the limited ability you've got. I think in Scotland, 75% of 16 and 17-year-olds at least have registered to vote. It'll be interesting to see how many actually participate, and I'm pleased that there will be some detailed studies carried out after that election to see what the impact was on, particularly on 16 and 17-year-olds in terms of participating in an election. And it may be that there's some things that we can learn from that, perhaps as a political party rather than necessarily as the government.
Thank you. Orson?
In regards to citizenship education, do you believe that the citizenship education is weakened by the gap between it and the current voting age?
Yes, I do. Again, as a Liberal Democrat, I do think that is a problem in that young people are very heavily engaged often, in my experience, in citizenship programmes, in talking about politics, in coming up to Westminster, for instance, and then if you then have a couple of years in which you cannot vote and you only are able to vote at 18, and by then you might have moved on to university, you might have moved to go to college somewhere, you've lost the link with your local area, and then I think there's a potential sort of downturn in terms of participation. So yes, I think there is a problem, and I think having votes at 16, so it coincides with citizenship. Young people are still predominantly at home and therefore have a connection, are more stable and therefore more likely to have registered to vote, I think would be preferable.
Brandon?
Many of our witnesses have said that there should be more politics teaching within citizenship teaching. Do you agree?
That is really a matter for the schools in terms of what they decide to include in their citizenship programme. But certainly my personal view is that I think there are ways of making politics interesting, challenging, and I'd want to all schools to want to make use of the resources that are available for that. Rock and roll is part of that. I know that UK Youth are producing a democracy challenge document, which I look forward to seeing, which can also be used, and there are various other resources that are available to try and engage young people more effectively in politics at an earlier age.
Some of our witnesses last week were in favour of creating a politics GCSE. Would you be in favour of this? And if so, do you think it should be compulsory?
I would be really overstepping the mark as a minister who has no responsibility for education to take a position in relation to that. But I don't see why, talking personally, I don't see why. I think that there are certain things that we do need to do at school, and I think maths and English are two of the key things that without which people are going to find it really difficult to progress later on in life. I don't think that is the case with politics. I certainly don't feel that it is something that should be compulsory. Whether there is a need for a politics GCSE, I'm afraid I don't know, and I don't know. I'll look at. I don't know whether any of your witnesses have explained why they felt that was a necessity, but certainly at the moment, I'm not convinced that is something that there is a huge demand or indeed potentially need for.
Thank you. Pass you over to Philip.
Mr. Bright, the Edinburgh Agreement allows 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. Why are they considered capable of choosing the future of their country, but not the result of other elections and referendums?
When the legislation was set up for the referendum, that was given over to the Scottish government. They chose to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to participate in that election. And that clearly was a decision that they was entirely within their remit to take. As I've said earlier, as a Liberal Democrat, I would favour allowing votes at all elections at 16 or 17, but as a government, that is not something that there is any agreement on. While I respect Scotland's independence in terms, or Scottish Parliament's independence in terms of its ability to take that decision. And I hope that, given that 75%, as I understand it, of 16 and 17-year-olds in Scotland have registered to vote, I hope there will be a very high turnout. As I said earlier, I think this is probably the most significant decision that they will take probably for the next 15 or 20 years. I don't think that sort of thing is something that can come back again in 5 or 10 years' time. I think there's almost a once-in-a-generation opportunity for people to have their say on that, and then it's not something that would come forward, in my view, for a further generation for another vote.
The Welsh Government and the Northern Ireland Assembly wish to lower the voting age to 16. Why have this government, of which you're a part, not delivered the power for them to do this?
I'm going over the same ground. As we discussed at the outset, the coalition agreement, there was no agreement on the issue of votes at 16. As I said, we've advocated it for many years. The Conservative Party are opposed. There was no common ground, really. You're either in favour of votes at 16 or you're not, and therefore it's not something that was in the coalition agreement. So the coalition government are not going to do anything that facilitates that process. However, as I mentioned earlier, I personally would be very, very interested to see what the feedback from the research that's going to be done into the participation of 16 and 17-year-olds in the Scottish referendum, what that has to say about the level of engagement, the turnout, and whether young people felt part of that process or not.
In the event of another coalition agreement following the 2015 election, would the Liberal Democrats joining that government be conditional on votes at 16?
You're asking me to draw red lines, and I'm certainly not going to do that. What is clear is that, with the exception of the Conservative Party, I think all of the political parties are in favour of votes at 16. If in future there is a coalition which included some of those parties, clearly when negotiations are taking place around another coalition agreement, if that's what happens, then what the political parties will be doing is they'll be identifying areas of policy where there is agreement. And at the moment, between the Liberal Democrats, the Labour Party, the SNP, the Greens, and I think all other parties, there is agreement that votes at 16 is something that they support. So if there is a future coalition which includes some of those parties, it is quite possible that that is something that would appear in the coalition programme, a future coalition programme, because you have to have elements that receive the support of all the political parties for there to be an agreement.
Finally, if there was one particular recommendation that you would like to see in our report about votes at 16, what would it be?
Well, as a Liberal Democrat, it's very straightforward, and I'm sure I don't want to prejudge what your report is going to recommend, but I'm assuming that it's likely to recommend votes at 16. That is something that I think is, for that to be delivered, I know that some of your witnesses have suggested that there isn't perhaps a significant groundswell of opinion in favour of votes at 16. I know that you have the capacity through what you're doing through things like the UK Youth Parliament to make votes at 16 a big issue, and if you chose to campaign on that and perhaps focus on the one political party that doesn't support votes at 16 in the run-up to the next general election, that may be something that you find productive.
Well, to finalise, Mr. Brake, I speak on behalf of the committee and saying thank you for giving up your time today to come and provide evidence to our committee. All of the evidence you have given us will be used in our report. Thank you very much. Order.
Thank you.